Welcome everybody. It's so fantastic to have so many like-minded people together in a space to discuss something that we're all so passionate about. And I know that I'm among friends when I look out at a sea of faces and so many of us wanting to come together and look at how we can positively impact outcomes for people who have been impacted by disaster. So thank you for those especially who've travelled to come today. Building on the lovely welcome to country that we had earlier, I also want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which where I'm speaking today, the Kumba people, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. While I've got the mic, this is a little bit off script, and if you humour me for the moment, I just want to take the time to acknowledge the staff of NCQ who've put together such a fabulous event today. So I might not get a time at the end, but I just want to take the time to say what a fantastic job they've done. I've been really impressed. I'm sure you have too. If you could all just join me in a round of applause. And now on to the official stuff. So the purpose of this session is to officially launch the Queensland Neighbourhood Centre's Strategy for Disaster Resilience. I think it's important to share some context of why NCQ and neighbourhood centres have developed this strategy. Compounding impacts of disasters, including the COVID-19 pandemic, have heightened the need for individual residents, small to medium organisations such as NCCs, or large services and government agencies to work together to support one another through these challenging times. There is now an urgency to develop and implement strategic approaches towards disaster resilience for and with the people of Queensland. Whilst it is reported that many non-profit organisations respond to disasters in Queensland, the response of local neighbourhood and community centres can sometimes be overlooked. These neighbourhood and community centres have been operating in local areas for more than 50 years, conducting community development within their communities and orchestrating citizen-led solutions for the challenges that they face. Their local knowledge and relationships mean they are well suited to prepare for, respond to and recover from monsoons and other disasters. As neighbourhood centres are already located in disaster-affected communities, they're often the first to respond with emergency relief and a range of other supports. The centres are incredibly resourceful when supply chains are cut to external services and are often involved in long-term recovery efforts in the years following. This strategy aims to capture and enhance the experience of valuable neighbourhood and community centres across Queensland. So we'd like to acknowledge the neighbourhood and community centres and NCQ staff that were involved in developing this strategy. And they'll be on the next slide. Is that me? Okay. Do I press a button? Okay. We'd also like to acknowledge the funders. This strategy has been jointly funded by the Australian and Queensland governments under the Queensland Resilience and Risk Reduction Fund. And I'd now like to hand over to Natasha Odgers, our Disaster Resilience Projects Lead and co-author of the strategy.
Thank you, Alana. So I'm going to share a little bit of an overview of the process and the key findings from the strategy. So a total of 121 people representing 104 neighbourhood centres had input into this state strategy and as a combination, this state strategy and the three strategies that we had leading into this strategy, which this strategy has as the underpinning documents. So that's a whopping 70% of neighbourhood centres across Queensland has had input into this. So thank you all. We've also had input from organisations into this. So we've had Queensland Recovery, the Queensland Reconstruction Authority, QFES, Give It, Good Shepherd and Bundaberg Regional Council. So I'd like to thank those representatives who many of you are in the room as well. A little bit about the context of this strategy. So as I said, it involves we had the bushfire strategy, a drought-focused strategy, a monsoon strategy, which I'll show shortly. But also this strategy culminates those and includes COVID and the compounding impacts of disasters. So it's an all-inclusive strategy. Our purpose has been to firstly inform what neighbourhood centres do and can do in the disaster sector. It is also to guide and support neighbourhood centres in the work that we do. It shows the common challenges and the common opportunities that there are, and looking at how we can all work together across the state and also in our local areas to work to address key issues that's been identified commonly across from neighbourhood centres. And it's also a point that can be used for advocacy, for promoting the work that neighbourhood centres do and seeking greater resourcing. So as I mentioned, we've had these 3 strategies. So that started in 2019. Since that time, we've been on quite a trajectory. When we first started this work, doing the drought strategy, we actually had this conference that's about to happen in the next 2 days, the Disaster and Emergency Management Conference. And that was our first time to actually say, hey, we're neighbourhood centres. You know, I was the only person at that conference representing neighbourhood centres, and it was, you know, interesting for the people that were responding, going, oh, we don't really know. We know of neighbourhood centres but don't really know what they're about. And so since that time, it's just been building and building for that recognition of the role that neighbourhood centres do play, and the fact that neighbourhood centres have been doing this for a very long time, just quietly behind the scenes in many situations. So we've had a whole range of processes in place to develop the content of the strategy, from a literature review to online facilitated discussions to case studies with neighbourhood centres, semi-structured interviews. We have the annual survey which produces the sector impact report, which is details across neighbourhood centres across the state. And then also we've had face-to-face workshops and a review through our disaster resilience working group made up of neighbourhood centres. So the research found through the development of this, that neighbourhood centres across the state are very much working with their communities in preparedness, response and recovery through community-led approaches. A review of the resourcing of neighbourhood centres was also identified, the need for that to deliver their roles in community disaster resilience to address common challenges that they face. Also, that's been identified is the current inconsistency of the strength of relationships between local councils and centres across the state, which does not support the objectives of the Queensland Disaster Management Plan. There's quite a range. We have, I guess, through a lot of disasters that do happen quite severely in the north of Queensland, we have seen that there's closer relationships with councils in the north compared to more the southeast corner. So we've identified areas to work on there. There's also the formation of functional and effective collaboration across the stakeholders groups operating in the disaster management space, that they could be a key factor in supporting effective outcomes for communities impacted by disasters. So one example that I'd like to share of this is that I can illustrate in terms of the kinds of effective collaboration we're talking about here is through Caloundra Community Centre, Sunshine Coast Council, and in the early stages, Queensland Fire and Emergency Services. In the first 6 years, I worked as a community development worker in Glasshouse Country, which is part of Caloundra Community Centre, and we had plenty of natural disasters, floods, fires, severe storms, but no community connection with disaster management arrangements. Basically no awareness amongst the community of disaster management arrangements. But 4 years ago, in this role, we began speaking with leaders in the community and of these groups, and what role that these groups, our local community groups, can play when it comes to disasters. We connected with Council and QFES and began community workshops, which then formed the Glasshouse Country Disaster Management Network. And during and after the 2022 floods, this network and the preformed relationship that we had with Council proved to be so valuable for community voices to be heard and to then work together with Council to plan and improve disaster management processes. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about when there's so much scope to improve our relationships because, and our working relationships and mutual understanding of what is possible. So these roles continue to be undertaken by both Council and community members in partnership. Other things that's been identified is the current recovery arrangements with neighbourhood centres require a review through the co-development of a cohesive vision for recovery in collaboration with communities and place-based service providers supported by the delivery model that provides more streamlined access to support. Also, the neighbourhood centre sector has identified the enhancement of organisational capacity, including the upskilling of staff and volunteers as areas of common need, particularly in response and recovery phases. So there are so many roles that neighbourhood centres play, and this is not by any means a comprehensive list. But just to highlight a few, in terms of what neighbourhood centres can provide in the preparedness phase of disasters, is participation in disaster planning, but as I've kind of touched on before, there is a long way to go, and there is a lot of scope to enhance this, but particularly for the inclusion of vulnerable people, and that's where neighbourhood centres, as we know, have very good relationships with people that are vulnerable in the community. So there's a lot of scope there to work with how neighbourhood centres can help link for planning. Also, a lot of neighbourhood centres co-host preparedness sessions and have long-term relationships with community members, which provides a lot of local knowledge that can be input into planning. In terms of response, there's information dissemination. Sometimes neighbourhood centres become evacuation centres or places of refuge and have a long history of providing emergency relief and information and referral. In terms of recovery, we have had centres working for well over 5 years, up to 10 in recovery. So this is the work that this strategy highlights, is the silent work. It's after the services leave, the neighbourhood centres are still there, and still there just diligently working and supporting, not out there promoting themselves, what they're doing typically, just doing the hard work for years later. Providing things like wellbeing checks, material aid, support with insurance claims, and then having those social groups, the continual social connection points, which is, we know, so important for recovery. So to give an idea of what the neighbourhood centre sector looks like across the state, here's a little bit of a glimpse from the sector impact report. So we have 149 centres in Queensland and 1,486 staff members, 2,729 volunteers each week, quite a lot of volunteers amongst us. Also, I won't go into the other details, but you can see there's quite a lot of movement in this sector and quite a lot of capacity, whilst there is also the issue that neighbourhood centres don't have enough capacity to do what is asked of neighbourhood centres, particularly during disasters. There's also some points here about how neighbourhood centres are making an impact. So I've mentioned emergency relief. There's food relief, there's frozen meals, there's non-food emergency relief, there's a lot of programs and referrals and social enterprises. So factors that do impact neighbourhood centres' ability to respond, and even when it comes to coming to meetings, like neighbourhood centres do typically want to be involved in a lot of things but don't necessarily always have the time. So things that do impact neighbourhood centres are funding, familiarity with disaster management, because it hasn't always been our core business, needs of the community, responding to the different needs of community, the geographical locations, and the levels of existing partnerships and relationships. So, I would now like to start by handing over for the first reading of one of the strategies, the first priority in the strategy, and we're actually going to hear from some neighbourhood centre representatives for this. So I'd like to hand over to Sandy Allen from Banarawa Community Development Association to present the first strategy.
Hi everyone. My name's Sandy Ellen Black and I'm one of the Community Development Coordinators at Banarawa Community Development Association. We're based at Graceville on the southwest banks of the Brisbane River on Yuggera country. So I've been asked to discuss strategic priority 1, which is raise awareness and recognition. Raise awareness and recognition of the role, value and capacity of neighbourhood centres in the disaster management system, supporting disaster-affected communities. So each neighbourhood centre in Queensland is unique. Some are humble buildings with 1 or 2 paid staff. Many have long-term staff and volunteers with long-term relationships. Others are larger organisations that manage their own private businesses. Some auspice other groups or have social enterprises. Some concentrate on centre-based service provision models, while others incorporate community development approaches. Really, until you chat with community members, volunteers or workers in a neighbourhood centre, you really don't get a feel of what we do or how we resource our local community. However, there's a few key things that we really do know about neighbourhood centres. A neighbourhood centre's role is to understand, support and resource to the best of their capacity their community, especially the most vulnerable community members. We are great at developing partnerships across well-resourced community members, businesses, other community groups, faith-based organisations, our local politicians and government bodies. We work collaboratively with these partners to support, connect and strengthen our communities. We know and understand our communities well and have solid, sustainable, reliable relationships. Neighbourhood centres are busy places, responding to those who walk inside the door, facilitating, connecting, influencing, welcoming and embracing our community's needs, their strengths and their ideas. So when it comes to a natural disaster, our role, our value and our capacity is very varied and very unique. It may include responding to the disaster itself. It could be that we respond during the recovery phase. We might be about building individual and community resilience, or we might be preparing for the very next disaster that we don't know when it's coming. At Banarawa, we use community development practice and doorstep visits are a key part of our work. Following the 2022 flood event, we have visited residents in Oxley and Corinda in their homes. We have doorstep visited over 250 residents with over 50 meaningful conversations. We've found that residents wanted more information about recovery and they wanted a fun family event. So in early June, in partnership with Club Oxley, who are great at running fun days, we organised the Oxley Resilient Festival. Over 150 residents visited service providers. We had about 15 different store providers there to help with flood recovery, and over 1,000 participated in a family fun day, which was a clear strategy to build community resilience. During this time, Banarawa has been creating spaces and places for residents to share their stories and experiences, to connect and to build helpful and meaningful relationships. We have had limited capacity to influence the disaster management authorities, and we've relied on our partners to do this on our behalf. So these partners have included our local, state and federal members. They've included the SES and the local community police, service providers like Red Cross, Good Shepherd, Wellways, the Salvos, Caxton Legal Service and the Uniting Care Financial Planning section. It's also included government agencies like the Disaster Flood Team with Metro South Addiction and Mental Health Service, sorry, it's such a mouthful, Queensland Centre for Perinatal and Infant Mental Health, the Brisbane City Council Disaster Management Team, and we've worked with the Resilient Home Fund as well. But our special thanks goes to Joe and Melinda from Community Plus, because we've relied on them considerably because they have the links to the disaster management authorities, and we know that they can share our stories for us. So those connections between neighbourhood centres has been really crucial to knowing that information. We don't have the capacity, but they've got more capacity to be able to step forward and to take on the stories and experiences that we've been able to share with them. But we have a new challenge ahead of us now. We have a group of residents who are keen to work together on flood preparedness, resilience, and take a bit of action. We're a small community organisation, and we're going to be faced with some challenges around capacity, and we're going to have to be creative and think about the ways that we can influence the disaster management arrangements alongside these community residents who we have contact with. So, if we are really fair about community-led, place-based approaches to disaster management, we really need to find meaningful ways to include neighbourhood centres at the table. There will be challenges because, like I've said, every neighbourhood centre is unique. The way we communicate, collaborate, and our organisational capacity all varies and are different. But we know that natural disasters are here to stay, and community residents are expecting an effective, responsive disaster management sector. I'd like to finish by inviting you to think seriously and consider ways that neighbourhood centres can be recognised in meaningful ways and included in disaster management arrangements. Thank you. Sorry, I invite Yasmin to come up for priority 2.
Hi, I'm Yasmin Barber. I'm from the North Burnett Community Service and I'm the CEO there, and unsurprisingly we operate in the North Burnett. So I'm here to talk about priority 2, so that's strengthening relationships and collaboration. Now, relationships. I think it's fair to say that neighbourhood centres, that's really what we're all about. We're all about building relationships, particularly community relationships, building them, sustaining them and fostering them. I don't want to speak too broadly, but for us, this is our bread and butter. This underpins everything that we do, and it is really the reason that we're so successful in what we do. We have deep relationships with community, we have deep, respectful relationships with community, and we offer a place for people to come together and build those relationships with each other as well. How do we build those relationships? So for us, the key things are by providing a welcoming, accessible, non-judgmental and safe space. And touching on what was said earlier today, that safe space includes a culturally safe space as well. It includes an accessible space for all people in our community, including people with a disability, people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, and all the different people we support. The other thing we do is we listen, we engage, and we also provide feedback. I think this is forgotten so often when we go out and say, oh, we want community to be involved. We want their feedback. We want to hear from community. But so rarely do we close the loop and tell them what we did with the feedback. What were the outcomes? One of the things that we've got to think about is when we're asking community to participate again, they're just hearing it's another organisation coming, it's another service coming, it's the government coming once more again to hear from us and take all the information that we have that we feel like we've told them over and over and over and over again, but we never see any of that active change. So yeah, it's really important for that listening, engaging and providing the feedback. What were the outcomes? What did you do? The other really key thing, and again, I know I'm talking, to everyone in the room knows these things, but it's about being consistent and being reliable. And that's what neighbourhood centres can provide and do provide. The community knows we're there. They know we're there today, tomorrow, and they know we're going to be there next year. And that's why they engage with us in a different way than what they do with other providers and other organisations. So yeah, those things are absolutely key for us. once you've got those deep relationships and those community networks and all of those things happening, it is the most valuable thing that you can have. And it's applicable to everything that we do, and of course that includes disaster resilience and response. Something else that will happen when you get those really deep functioning relationships in other organisations and government and other people, see that people are just coming into your centre. As someone said before, we're busy. You know, there's people coming in, other people, other organisations, other groups will want to utilise those relationships and networks. That's a fantastic thing, and it offers some really great opportunities. It also presents some challenges for us as well. We have limited resources, we have limited time, we have limited funding. So sometimes it is about guarding what you do a little bit jealously and thinking carefully about who we partner with and who we work with. Does the person reaching out to us or the group reaching out to us actually share our principles, our values, our goals? Are they, for me, the question I ask is, are they actually going to deliver the outcomes to community that they're going to deliver? Because part of that reputation that you develop, community doesn't see government over here and state government there and council there and this organisation. They just see you, particularly if that group's meeting in your neighbourhood centre. So if it's something that's not reliable, if it's something that isn't going to deliver good outcomes for community, that can actually reflect on you negatively as well. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, don't be afraid to say, actually, I'd love to work with you on this and there's some really great things here, but I need you to do X, Y or Z to come to the table. I need you to show what you're going to do and deliver for community. Or of course you could always say no as well. The other thing around greater collaboration across the sector and with other organisations. So I will say, when I first came to this space about 2.5 years ago, I did feel really isolated. So I'd previously worked in Brisbane, I worked for very large organisations, and I was used to having well-structured, available networks and community groups, you know, the D8 in disability services, when I was working in child safety, like big networks, peers around that I could bounce ideas off and engage with. And I did feel really isolated in the region. I did kind of find myself sitting there going, oh, who do I talk to? Who do I get advice from? Who can I, you know, kind of, who can mentor me? Who can I engage with? So ways around that and delivering that is obviously engaging on days like today, participating with NCQ, which has made a really big difference. But it can still feel isolating at times, and it does feel isolating, particularly in regional areas. And this is where I'd say find your tribe. Find those people in community, in state government, in council, in the federal area that do work like you, that do operate in the way that you do, that are keen on delivering those outcomes and, you know, creating really great partnerships. You might even find yourself that when you're trying to work, particularly in the disaster space, there's some functions and certain ways that things work and triggers that happen. You might find that one of those in your area might not be functioning as well as it does in other areas, council. But yeah, but that's about then, again, going back, finding your tribe. We've got some excellent workers on our council that do some amazing stuff. Build those relationships with them, find your workarounds, find out the best way to do it. And if you're not invited to the table, you know, it's that old adage, bring that chair, drag it up and invite yourself to the table. We've come to realise that the single biggest protective factor for people recovering from disaster is community connection. Community connection is our bread and butter. We do it every day, and that's why neighbourhood centres are so well placed to be involved in the resilience and recovery space, and we just offer something that other providers can't. Thank you. I'd like to invite Melinda to come and talk to us about the next strategic priority.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Melinda McInturf, and I'm the Community Resilience Coordinator at Community Plus in Yeronga. It's really still hard for me to say that because I have been the community development worker at Yeronga Community Centre for 11 years before now, and this is just a new role for me. So I know how hard we work every day at the coalface of a community centre. I've been doing that since the community centre at Yeronga established. In 2011, we were a group of volunteers I was a person who worked at Yeronga Primary School and saw a need in our community as the floods were entering homes of our families, of our school. Never did I think that 12 years later this is where I would be. The priority that I'm going to be talking about this morning is priority 3, influencing policy and shaping funding. Influence policy and shape funding models to enhance funding arrangements to neighbourhood centres for place-based and community-led disaster recovery and resilience. For the last 11 years, I've been trying to build resilience and gain funding and influencing policy in my community. I heard a great analogy a few months ago from a person who quoted Shirley Chisholm, who was one of the first African-American women in Congress in America. She said, if you're not invited to the table, bring a folding chair. I've been bringing a folding chair or standing in the corner, listening and learning for the last 11 years. I've been building partnerships with people that I didn't know why I was building those partnerships because, as Yasmin just said, sometimes I was giving and they weren't giving in return. Little did I know that all that preparation and planning was for the event of 2022 that devastated our community. Our community was impacted by the floods. Our community centre sits in Yeronga, and we have a centre at West End as well. Those two communities were impacted heavily by the flooding, and our community was not prepared as well as we should have been. Our organisation has been, as I said, trying to influence policy by building those partnerships, learning and influencing, shaping funding, program design. Little did I know that standing next to me, which Em was part of this, establishing this in our organisation, was the Q-Stars program. They are the best advocates that we can have in our organisation. They have taught me to stand up for when I see things that are wrong and know that we can change policy as we have done. We have been part of changing policy with this new funding that we have with the service navigation. We've been part of, with the federal government, with the Tell Us Once program that they're doing, where you tell the government once your story, you don't have to tell them 10 times. That's with the federal government. We have been working with Resilient Home Funds, advocating for policy change, for form change, just simple things like changing a form. The third-party form that we had gave the service navigators the authority to act on the people's behalf. That's not what we needed. What we needed was just a form to let us know what was happening with their application. We've been advocating to make change where we saw that it didn't pass the pub test, as I say. We want our community to be more resilient for the community. And if we can't get the most vulnerable to access the programs through resilient homes and structural assistance, we're failing where we need to be working better. We've been advocating for changing for funding arrangements, asking for funding when we needed it, first when we enacted the Community Recovery Centre. My manager in 2022 asked me on the first day after the flood what she needed to do. I said, you need to go and get us money to be able to do this. We know that this is available and we need to be accessing that now. She did that, and thanks to the Queensland Government for listening to us and helping us make a difference in the life of thousands of people in our community. We've been rewriting the rules. I'm probably a pain in the neck to lots of people in this room for advocating for funding, showing that we just aren't willing to sit back and say, okay, we'll do it for that much. I've been part of the neighbourhood sector for a long time now, and we've been working long hours for not getting paid for those hours. and I was not prepared to do this time. I worked for 6 months in 2011 for free, along with Joe, my colleague, and Fiona McLeod. And what we did in 2011, on the 23rd of June, we put a sign up in our centre that said, if we don't get funding, the centre will be closing on the 30th of June. The Queensland Government came back to us and told us that we couldn't close. I said, you can't tell us what you do, you don't give us money. We had a great MP then who advocated for us and made a meeting, which was how our connection with West End Community House started. He advocated for us that we needed the funding, or that his neighbour, he would lose the election. He did anyway, but I didn't control that. We all know, if you've been around since the Campbell-Newman days, you probably know that advocating was actually outlawed for community centres during that time. That was very hard for us to stand back and see that our community was not getting the funding and the policies that we needed during that time. As I said, we worked with our MPs, our councillors, our federal members, getting them to know who we were, what we were doing. You have to get them to know who you are. They might, gloss over you and walk away from you not knowing who you are, but just keep showing up at their door, keep sending them emails, letting them know who you are. Our member Mark Bailey, who happens to be the Minister for Transport, has been a great advocate of our community centre. He was the reason why the recovery centre was put at our centre in 2022. We had been talking to him about this leading up to the flood, that we needed that to happen in our community because we are known for doing flood recovery. He advocated with the federal member, Graham Perrott, to make sure that happened. They said, it's not going to happen. And then next minute they were on our doorstep, said, this is where we're setting up. It would be nice to have a little bit of notice. But we were glad to do that. I know that advocating with your MP can sometimes be hard, but our member, Mark Bailey, has been unbelievable during this time. I raised some questions with him and he around the resilient home package and the rental support grants that we do. And he said, they're telling me that this is all happening. And I said, but that's not what's happening. And he said, why don't you come into Parliament House, we'll get them around a table and you can ask the questions. That's hard to go to a place like that where you're the outsider. They don't know who you are, although I did find out that I knew most of them when we went to the meeting. But it's great for community centres to advocate. We know our communities, we know what they need. We can be the best advocates and we need to stand up for our community wherever we can. I want to acknowledge the Queensland Government for the respect that they've shown our community centre and all the service navigators during this time. This is a monumental change to policy that service navigators will put in neighbourhood centres in Queensland. I want to thank Sam for all the support that he's given to me and to the service navigators to make sure that he's listening and his team are listening to us, as is Resilient Homes and the Department of Public Works. And I just want to let everybody know that, to raise your voice for the people that you care about, and that's the communities that we work in. I would like to invite Leanne Harris, who's from Mount Isa Neighbourhood Centre, to speak about strategy number 4.
Hello, y'all. I'm going to talk about strategy number 4, which is about learning and development. Foster and strengthen place-based learning and development to support disaster-affected communities through the complexities and compounding natures of disasters. I think learning and development really starts with your community and connecting them for them to notice that they have skills. And the community does have skills, and I think a lot of those communities, as we say in Mount Isa, it's not their first rodeo. They have overcome previously. And I think that's one of the biggest things about resilience. Resilience is around our capacity to overcome. And I think we've all overcome something in our lives. And when people notice around their overcoming, it gives them that muscle that they realise that they can. And when they come together as a collective and they all share their stories of, I can, that's when they start feeling like we are here and we are connected and we can get through this. I think some of the practical things that the neighbourhood centres do, we do things like, sorting out mental health first aid. We do lots of workshops, lots of courses, lots of overcoming grief and loss, lots of understanding around it's not what happened to me, but the way I react after it's happened. We are a place that do practical things like the no-interest loans, like the emergency relief, like supporting somebody whose car is not going to get registered unless we are able to get things in place to be able to make that happen. And certainly some of the emergency relief and some of the practical things makes that happen for people. I think also a lot of what we do at the centre is some of the after-school activities for those kids that aren't necessarily the sporty kids, that love doing art and love doing activities and that can share those skills with some of the other people in our community that love being able to, that volunteer their time to be able to. We have young sketch artists, we have young watercolour artists, we have a thing called spinning a yarn which we do on a spinning wheel and learn how to spin, and then we have crocheting sessions. Lots of really good things happen in neighbourhood centres. But I think one of the lovely things that we've talked around here, around the strategies that we're putting in place, not one part of us have talked about a model or a way of engaging that is going to be the same, because each and every one of our doors is different and our door represents our community. And I think that's the strength that is in this room, is that we just don't talk about place-based, we actually are place-based. And all those stories, they are our words, they are our community's words that we are sharing in those. So our communities have great skills. I think us as neighbourhood centres is for them to notice that they already have them, and then for us, and for us as a sector to be able to share those words and to make meaning of those words. And I think for all those people that have told their stories time and time again, their stories are now written and their stories will now get heard and their stories will make meaning to a policy that's important to each and every one of our neighbourhood centres. So I think it's fabulous to see so many people in the room and to understand. I think I'm preaching to the converted. We are a group of people that are passionate, and I think we support some very passionate members and staff members and people and management committees and all those things that make up a neighbourhood centre. We do a good job. Thank you.
How good were those speakers? Isn't it amazing to watch a document that's a piece of paper be brought to life by people that are so passionate and just reflect the quality of people in our sector? I was so proud to represent a sector that's got such amazing people contributing to it, and thank you so much for taking the time to speak to the work that you're doing today. Yeah. I now have the privilege to introduce Karen Denham, who's the project's lead for the Queensland Financial Resilience Program through Good Shepherd. Good Shepherd is delivering that program in conjunction with Queensland Neighbourhood Centres Queensland. They've been delivering social justice programs in Australia for 160 years. The delivery of the programs is done with place-based community development, which is why working with NCQ and member organisations makes such a wonderful partnership. So thank you, Karen.
Hi everybody, and thank you very much. It's just wonderful to be here today, and I've really enjoyed the whole session. And can I make particular mention of those last four speakers and Natasha, because I thought that summed up beautifully what neighbourhood and community centres do, and just the diversity of the work and the way that you have that passion that is about your community. So congratulations to everybody. I'm here today because we're actually partnering with Neighbourhood Centres Queensland at the moment, doing the Financial Resilience Program, and it's been a great honour and wonderful support from them for their leadership and their great collaboration for the program and what we're able to deliver across the organisations that we're working with. So thank you to the team, and thanks for the team. Congratulations on this wonderful, wonderful document.
I think we might have come to the nuts and bolts of this. Does anybody have... Oh no, it's not scissors, it's ribbon pull. Okay.
This is a bit of fun. I can't believe I'm getting to do this, but I'm very excited.
You get to say that words there, so let's move over here. Yes.
Okay, drum roll.
Yeah, nice, thank you.
I officially launched the Queensland Neighbourhood Centre Strategy for Disaster Resilience. So thank you very much.
Yay. Thank you so much, Karen. So, as has been highlighted, I encourage you to all take the time to read the strategy for yourself via our website or via the QR code on the back of your lanyard, and to engage with neighbourhood centres in your community on supporting disaster-affected communities. I'm about to finish my time at the mic and I won't get another opportunity, so I just wanted to thank you all for coming again today. For those of you who are staying tomorrow and the next day, I just hope you have a fabulous conference. For those of you who are heading back tonight, just wish you safe travels. So I'll throw back to Natasha, but thank you again